Hello, welcome back to BLENDERSUSHI Live Noding. In this video, I will be exploring some concepts and theory behind cycles, texture mapping, and creations for cycle materials. I'm probably gonna be jumping around and talk about some of this list of topics like. Is it a 2D or 3D texture? Is it a non-procedural or procedural? And talk a little bit about group node and then operators node and mapping node. So there's a lot to cover, but this is not like a lecture. I'm just gonna be exploring stuff. So yeah, let's just get started. I just want to share my thought what I'm thinking when I'm working with materials, and I'm still also learning about Blender cycles materials. That's the area I'm interested in at the moment. So when you first start Blender, it will be default to Blender render. Remember, for all these to work, it needs to be cycles render. So, and then you want to go to the compositing layout. So it's probably the most convenient layout, but you can of course adjust it to your own convenience. And here you have Sverchok animation nodes because I install those, but you normally in the Blender default you have compositing and the texture and then these material nodes. We will not be the texture creations is also interesting, but we won't be touching that. This is kind of maybe I think legacy stuff and more related to compositing, but cycles material is what's the most interesting for me. And turn on use nodes, and by default you're getting this diffuse, BSDF, and material output. And I found that with all kind of node-based workflow, the hardest part is actually to find out that you have like almost hundreds of nodes and then you don't know where to start with. But by making this video, I started to kind of grouping nodes depending on the context you are working on, and kind of knows that these nodes you might use it more often than the others. Okay, so if you're first time working with cycles, you can definitely you want to play around with the BSDF. That's the material for the surface, the look of the surface, and you can pick one from one of these, whether it's gonna look like glass or whether it's gonna emit like light, just like a normal lamp, self-emitting light, or you wanna maybe work for materials for hair or maybe particles, all sort of stuff. But this is something you want to play around with and then just have a look at the render result. Today I will be mostly focusing on the texture, and here with texture you have bunch of procedural textures, and there is one node for image texture where you can use your own image. And now what is procedural texture and how does it compare to non-procedural textures? Now, procedural textures can be 2D and can be 3D, and if I just describe it to you, procedural is usually mathematically it has math behind it. It's kind of like algorithm that generate the texture. So the texture will be resolution independent, which means no matter how close you are to the texture, it's gonna be always looking good and not pixelated. While non-procedural texture is something that you might create using Photoshop, or when you take a picture, or when you draw your own artwork, when you paint your own texture, and you have like certain resolutions, 2K, 4K, or maybe 800 by 800 pixels. You know, that pixel is the resolutions, and if you zoom in, eventually you're gonna see the pixels. And so non-procedural textures is resolution dependent, while procedural textures is resolution independent. And here you have some of the example. Brick texture checker environment is something else. It's for your environment HDR map. Gradient, magic, Massgrave, noise, point. Sky is also procedural. Porno and wave, they are all procedural. Maybe I should give an example. The simplest one, probably checker. And here we will be touching surface volume displacement. I talked about volume a little bit the other day, so this video is gonna be more basic than that. When we are talking about surface, we're gonna need this shader beforehand, and then we can plug in the texture into it. So I just plug it in. This is the default. It's gonna give us this kind of textures. And when you're applying materials into 3D objects, you might have objects that's actually flat or has a volume, like a 3D object that's actually looking 3D with a how do I say it? With a three-dimensional, or this is just a two-dimensional flat object. I'm gonna use both so we can see the difference. So looks like by default the box actually, even though it doesn't have UV, it's kind of auto-generated. So it has something. Even if I have an object like sphere, and then yeah, I'll save it. Cycles, texture, explore. If I'm applying the same material for the sphere, it's gonna look like that. It's auto-generated. So, and it's actually this checker texture will work like a 3D. So any 3D object, even like a Suzanne, the monkey head, you're gonna have a result right away. Okay, that's it's very obvious, but have a look at each one of the texture. I'm not gonna talk about all of them. You can control the scale and stuff. At the moment, okay, when you're rendering in cycles, make sure actually you are aware of there's a camera. This is the render camera, and there is a light here, and the light will affect the final render. If I delete the light, it's gonna be completely dark. I can show it to you if I hide this light and then render it. Oh, okay, probably it's now being lit by the environment. It's like a grayish value. If I increase it, so it's like pure white light on the environment. It's gonna be a little bit flat. Normally this is kind of like the ambience, kind of giving you the overall global illuminations, while the other light, if we bring it in, this light can give you shadows and kind of a more natural looking look. Very realistic. Cycles can easily give you like a realistic looking render. It's probably a little bit harder to be stylistic when you're using cycles. Stylistics, what I mean is like a kind of like anime kind of look or stylistic game kind of look. It's not necessarily need to be realistic. Alright, so So I talk about procedural texture, and you get some of them here, and by default each one of them will render anyway, even though they don't have like a texture coordinate. But if you try something like image texture, let me open one, just the snail picture from the other day. If I just how can I see the snail picture? So I just open it in Blender, so it should be inside image editor. So it's, yeah, that's my scribbles from the other day. That should be showing up here, right? If I plug it into the diffuse, and apparently it doesn't show up. So with non-procedural texture, it doesn't have the built-in coordinates, so you need to use a texture mapping. Texture coordinate is the nodes that you will need to use. There's also mapping, UV mapping, but I found that mapping is the one that's the most robust. So this is a kind of like a big looking node like that. We're gonna take a look on what it does. So with texture coordinate, you can specifically select the object. We can leave that empty. We can just generate it, and then let's have a look. So this is like auto-generated mapping for each texture. Usually it's gonna give pretty good result, but of course it's gonna look bad on the like a more 3D kind of object, but on a flat object should be fine. If I have like a rectangular, non-square kind of object, is gonna stretch, I believe. Okay, so it is stretching. Let's see if I could give just better lighting. So this is gonna be, so the lamp can use nodes as well. So you can use texture on the emissions. Give it a yellow and give this like a blue color. Render it out. So this is what we get. This is of course stretch because it's we are using the same material for all this 3D mesh, and we can further control the mapping using this mapping node. So you have texture coordinate, and there is a UV. UV is the usual workflow you learn in a computer graphics. So each object can have its own UV, and by using UV mapping, you can have more control over how the image being projected into each face, polygon face. Yeah, maybe I'll just show it to you on this box right here. So I'm gonna have two objects, two of this box. One of them have a UV, and I'm just gonna use smart UV project, and the UV will look like that, and then okay, that's a snail. Of course, it's gonna be sliced. We can map the UV like that, or just unwrap it and then maybe reset the UV or something. Where's the reset UV? Let me check U, and then okay, reset. So reset's gonna just kind of like cutting all the polygon face and then make them square, and then you will see the result. It's easier to show you. So this guy will need the UV plug-in. The rest of them doesn't have UV, so it's gonna disappear. But if you use the UV, so that's what we get. That might be what you want, depending on your purpose. Anyhow, UV is will be dependent on the UV per object. we're not gonna worry about UV for now. There's also other like object, camera, objects probably similar to generated, but it's per object basis. I think I can rotate it. With object, I can rotate the object and it will still looks correct, but with generated, it might be swimming. With camera and window, it will definitely swim over. So maybe you will rarely use that, but you still find a use for it. Camera, you just, it's gonna be dependent on where the camera is looking. Generated is the one we're gonna use today, just to make things a little bit simpler and clearer. Okay, so I have it set to generated. Gonna save a new file. And here we have mapping, and mapping will control how the textures keep being mapped. And there are 4 different options. I'm not gonna explain everything. I'm actually just gonna explore it. Scale. Let's see if I'm scaling it up. I'm actually having a tiled image. That's one important thing for now. So maybe give it like 5 by 5. So it's gonna be tiled 5 times. And you can see here that the image, the non-procedural image, that's normally a 2D image, is flat. It doesn't have, it doesn't go through unless if I scale it. Maybe do it differently. I was expecting it to see like a stretching on the 2D on this cube, but it doesn't seem to be doing it. That's okay. So currently it's tiling, but you can also turn on min and max, and then you will see that you can actually control how many times it's being repeated. And just now you can see it's stretching when it's when the value is kind of in between. Maybe I just want it to be repeating between 2 and 4, so that's kind of clamping. I guess it's clamping the kind of like a trimming or cropping the image tiling. We have the tile here, so 1 times, maybe 6 times, but we are limiting it to between 2 and 4. So that's what we get. So that if that's what you want, so now you know what it does. Locations, of course, control. It's gonna offset. The Z doesn't have any effect at this moment because this is a 2D textures. If we are using like a procedural texture, it's the Z will have effects. For example, if I'm using a Massgrave texture, and here, okay, a vector. So vector plug into the Massgrave texture, and color output. Now we can see the result. The min and max still affecting them, so if I turn it off, now we have the whole surface is being covered by the Massgrave texture. Let me scale it, and this is what we got. Maybe I will reset the rotations for the cube. Now if I'm changing the Z value, you see how the 3D texture is kind of going through the objects, kind of like slicing. That's the advantage of 3D objects. You see, for 3D objects like for 3D texture like this, if you're like lazy, like you don't actually need to do the UV, and 3D texture is always beneficial this way. You can generate texture that's if your object's kind of like maybe breaking up, like being fractures. 3D texture is perfect for that. That you can always have like a crisp, less resolutions, no matter how close the camera, and it will work on 3D mesh regardless. Probably doesn't work in game unless the game itself is using a procedural texture. Okay, so that's 3D texture. I can show it to you also if I'm using array and then make a couple of duplicates here in the Z axis. Yep, like that, constant offset. I believe each one of the array copy will have a different texture. So this is almost like looking through a volumetric and this is exactly what's happening if you have like a volumetric object and we want to see the exact texture, 3D textures swimming through the mesh. This is exactly what you're seeing. In fact, I'm gonna do something real quick. So we're probably okay with the image texture. We can see how it works with the mapping. Now I'm gonna do something that might be a little bit unusual. So far we have been using this same material for all 6 objects. You can see it here. There's a number 6. That means 6 objects is using the same material. I will be kind of using the idea of using group node inside cycles. You can kind of group bunch of connected nodes and then turn it into a single node that you can share with another material. So that's kind of nice. Let me see, because I want to create another material where I'm using the volume. So we're gonna leave the diffuse alone, but we're gonna group this part like here. I'm gonna draw it using grease pencil. So yeah. So I'm gonna call this material surface and make another material and call this material volume. And here I'm gonna use emission, plug into the volume, and probably gonna apply the material into one of these guys. So now this guy is volumetric. Okay, this person is using material volume, should be using material surface. Okay, now I will use this, I will group this guy, Control G. Now I'm inside a node group. As you can see, we are inside material surface node, and then it's a node group. For the group input, I don't actually need that. I can delete it or just leave it like that. The rest of them, this is a 3D texture we are using. It's all fine. We can just go out, hit tab, go out to the top, and we have this node group. And we can rename this as something else. Let me test this. Okay, I think that's a good idea to rename everything. This is gonna be if we leave it like that, and then create another node group. So the name is still the same. Properties. Okay, we can probably name it here. My Massgrave. If I duplicate it, it's gonna be same my Massgrave, and then name group 001. That's what I want. Okay, my Massgrave, plug into the diffuse, and then for the surface look for that objects, but we're gonna use the same node in another material. So this guy, material volume, and we're gonna just search it from here. Here we can find my Massgrave. Just plug it in and see what we have. Okay, so it's a 3D texture. This guy is missing the strength though. It's maybe I need to go up and then also plug in the vector. So we have the color and vector out. Now you can see it's updating, and then we can also plug it in. So now we have proper volume texture. We can use emission, or we can also use the volume absorption and volume scatter. So it's totally up to you. You can also use this and plug this factor to density, and then have a look. It's gonna look like that. It's because we don't have enough light, and we can multiply the density. Like I did this in the previous tutorial. I increased the density, and looks like I don't have enough lighting. So volume is very sensitive to light, I think. Oh, I made a mistake here. The volume scatter should be the last. This is like the closure for this. Should be like that. Okay, and that's a proper volume shader, but although it's super basic, you can give it I also plugged into the wrong thing. Value should go to the density, of course. Now it's proper. Okay, and if I give a red color, I'm getting green, like the invert. I was told by Jeffrey, I think Jeffrey, what is his name, from Blender Diploma. He said I'm getting inverted because I'm not using volume scatter, so I should be using both. I don't know. Let's try RGB mix shader. So I'm gonna mix the shader. Nope, gonna add the shader together. Not sure if this is totally correct, but we'll try anyway. So it's still kind of green. Because I'm using two volume scatter. Volume absorption. Now it's more proper, I guess. It's both of them have red. So it needs both. That's why I rather use emissions as a closer for volume. So I'm getting, it's much simpler to work with, although the color comes from the Massgrave in this case. It's okay, just leave it black and white for now. We don't care too much about that. But what I want to show it to you is that this My Massgrave node is actually live, and then you can always go inside it, and then you can play with the scale. You see how it's changing? It's changing the whole setup for all the materials. So that's a nice trick. And of course, since we have the texture coordinate and mapping inside, we can make all the adjustment as we need. Tile repeating, we already covered that. Noise affecting, texture coordinate. Now, okay, noise affecting texture coordinate. That's probably the last thing I need to show you today. Let me save this real quick and then save again. I should have shown the math thing earlier, but that's okay. We can still make adjustment inside the node group here. Let's see if I use checker. Checker is the simplest kind of texture. It's actually 3D as well. You can see it's tiling correctly on each mesh. Reduce the scale to 1. We don't actually need mapping at this moment, but I can do noise texture. Basically the idea is for procedural texture or non-procedural textures, we will be needing the mapping, like the texture coordinate, and we can actually kind of play with the texture coordinate, whether it's actually in 3D or whether it's in 2D or 3D. Texture coordinate, it's hard to explain because you just have to see it. We can kind of disturb or deform the texture coordinate. That's the whole idea. So, and I found out that there's a couple of nodes we can use. Vector math, I think, and there's also mix RGB. So they both seem to be similar, but vector math works best for numbers, while mix can work with numbers and also with color. And with mix RGB, you have a lot more operations you can do. I actually learned this trick from another video YouTube tutorial. If you search for how to blur or how to use noise to deform or disturb your texture, you will find that YouTube videos. Kind of this same idea. Let's say we're using generated, and then we have this noise texture here, and noise texture we can, let's see, just in case we're gonna use offset, I just plug in the color into the vector, and there's a 0.5 by default, and plug in the vector there. Let's see if this actually works right away. I might be doing it wrong. Okay, it seems to work, and then this is the default noise value. It's scale of 5. If I make it 0, everything now goes back to normal. If you're seeing okay, if you're new to Blender cycles, just now I'm switching between the normal 3D view and then render. This is actually live rendering on the screen. This is not your final render. Final render is going to be much better, but you can stop the render, you can pause it, or you can let it render, and then it's gonna be sampling every second. It will do a calculations, and the sampling number here is dependent on the property here. There's a sampling and there's a preview and final render. Final render is usually higher, because with final render usually you tell computer to render it, do the batch rendering overnight. You go to sleep and your computer is calculating everything, while preview is what you want to see on the screen while working on the texture. Okay, so back to this guy. So we are here. If we have, you see, this is the vector operations we can use to kind of offset. Say if I want to offset the texture, I can do it like that in the X, Y, or Z. This is the vector math. It's color going through to the vector math, and this is actually fine. It's working nicely. Dot product, I rarely use it because, and cross product, I also rarely use it because I don't know but they are can be important. Average not so important in this case, but the add will give you offset of the texture, because its checker pattern is not so obvious. But see here, we are modifying the texture coordinate. We can just plug in the final vector into Massgrave, for example, and now we have Massgrave texture, and we can offset it. If you don't want to always to click that, you can use XYZ, combine XYZ, and then have this node kind of controlling the offset of your texture. Okay, that's really nice. If you can see the voxel box here, because maybe the volume, maybe the resolution is a bit small there. We can always increase the Massgrave texture there, or now if you want to disturb the Massgrave, we can use the noise. So this is really cool. Same thing, like if we go back to checker texture and plug that in. Oh, I know why. Just now we are seeing voxel because I forgot to plug in the factor, but that's what we get from using Massgrave. And Massgrave itself has a lot rich multifractal, hybrid, and you can always do fancy stuff like contrast, increasing the contrast or reducing it. All sort of interesting stuff you can do with just a procedural texture, or you can also use color ramp. Yeah, so back to checker texture, and let's see. So this is checker texture, but now it's looking more interesting because we use the noise to disturb the texture coordinate. In fact, this is already kind of intermediate, because we are controlling the texture coordinate using another procedural texture, and this is actually the key to kind of using the elementary or the base procedural texture to generate more complex texture. There's a lot in cycles to kind of study and to explore and to actually make materials. So next time you go out and look at the textures, whether it's a human generated materials or nature generated materials, have a look at study and then kind of try to figure out how to generate those. It's gonna be fun. So noise texture give you that. Let's see if you use like Voronoi. Voronoi, I think, will give you kind of like roundish kind of look. I don't know how it works, but Voronoi, normally if I think of Voronoi, it's kind of, oh, let me draw it. Draw Voronoi pattern manually. It's a bit like bubble, and each of the bubble have I think it has like a center, and its center is like a bubble. I don't know, and it's kind of, if you're creating a bubble soap and look at its soap, it's kind of, that's a kind of Voronoi, like a cell. Yeah, I don't know, but if you're using Voronoi there, you get kind of roundish, bubbly kind of look, and if you increase it, you end up with this kind of pattern. Very interesting. Very still, it's kind of organic, but still maybe not organic enough, but still looking interesting. You can use intensity or cell. cell give you something like that. If you actually just plug in the Voronoi into the color, that's what you get, you know. That's like a bubble, basically. Just now you might see that we have the checker that's being disturbed by noise, and then we are using Voronoi, and you look at the volume. Hey, that looks pretty. That looks really pretty, kind of like bubbles. I don't know, something. But that's a Voronoi. This is Voronoi cell, and the other one is Voronoi intensity. So, which looks like a. This looks like something in the water. If you go out to swimming pool outdoor and you can see the light creating this pattern, what do they call it? Caustics. That's called caustics. So this is a cheap way to generate caustics. You can use Voronoi apparently. And back to cell. This is cell, but if you use cell to disturb the texture coordinate, you are getting something like this. Let's increase the Voronoi. That's what you get. Like a crack. Maybe crackles. Kind of. And if you look at the video on how you blur and disturb texture using noise, you will see there is a combinations of mix RGB and vector math being used, and I think subtracting it. I can't remember. I think if you subtract this and that, you're gonna have like a blurred kind of result. Maybe this is kind of blurry. I don't know. You have to just check that that video. I don't want to duplicate the video, but yeah, I think this is kind of what it's doing. It's based on a paper. See what's happening here? It's kind of noise blurring the checker pattern, and you can control it using the factor here. Super blurry or less blurry or just a little bit blurry. I'm not sure if this is 100% correct, but I'm kind of blurring the volume as well, which is interesting. If I use something like gradient, I wonder if I can get like a blurry kind of sphere. Let's try spherical, plug in the color and the factor. Color and factor. And we need texture coordinates. Texture coordinate, and then use generated. And maybe vector math minus 0.5 here, and we get we actually have the sphere in the center. Let's use texture mapping and reduce the scale. Oh, okay, that's controlling the scale. So that's a sphere. Now if I plug in this guy, the disturb color, into the vector, are we blurring this guy? Maybe we did. So this is normal, but it's also affecting the positions. Yeah, anyway, that's another for another video, I guess. For now, this is what we get. You can blur the texture basically. If, I'm using image texture, so this is already kind of touching that video. Yeah, so that's blurring the 2D texture using noise. I don't know how that works, but it's subtracting generated, and you can control with a subtract with a mix RGB node. You can have this factor, unlike the factor math. And let's see if we can zero it out. Now we have it centered with a volume and a single value node. We kind of seeing it as a volume. Maybe I need to invert it. So that's a nope. Don't worry about that. I guess this is pretty much it for this video for live noding. So yeah, you basically have seen some examples how you can use some procedural textures and how you can work with the texture mapping and kind of warping or distorting the texture map using another procedural texture to get a more interesting texture result. And you also have been seeing the group node in action, and also have seen example as a volumetric render and as a surface render. I will not do much displacement for now because displacement might take a little bit longer, but displacement is as easy as plugging in the value into it and using a bump map. You've seen it before. This has its own, you know, quirk or its own theory. Anyhow, it's I think I've talked about all this. Yeah, so hopefully you find this video tutorial useful. You can leave comments and suggestion and just let me know what you think. And thanks again for tuning in. I'll see you on the next